Blocks and tubes and balls. Oh my! Heyo boys and girls, I'm Josh and I love to teach about art, creativity, and philosophy. So today it's about blocks and tubes and balls. Oh my! Well, we've already talked about the box and the cylinder. That only leaves the ball or the sphere. Hopefully that cylinder warm-up helped you with drawing those ellipses, but now we have another interesting challenge to conquer because the sphere is perfectly round. That doesn't mean I expect you to draw perfect circles to make a sphere, but getting close definitely helps. This is the last of the basic forms exercises that I'm going to have you go through, so let's make it count. So go ahead and loosen up your arm by drawing a bunch of circles. Practice, practice, practice. Now would be a good time to go ahead and practice some shading with the side of your pencil too, because the only way to make a circle a sphere is with rendering and shading. And that's an interesting point. Spheres don't indicate a direction, not without a good bit of rendering anyway. On the other hand, boxes can indicate height, width, rotation, and tilt. Cylinders are a little more limiting as you don't have any side faces, but you can still indicate height, width, and tilt. Spheres just kind of exist. There's no faces, just a ball. So rendering is the only way to establish where a ball is in space. All right, that being said, let's go ahead and get straight to today's exercise. It's going to be a little bit different. Today, we're going to render a sphere. I figured it was as good a time as any to introduce a new skill and discuss some of the things you'll want to keep in mind for future lessons. So let's draw a circle. Keep it light and clean up anything you might need to clean up. If you've warmed up correctly, this will be much cleaner in the first pass than if you hadn't warmed up at all. But you still might need to give this a few tries before you get something that's as circular as you'd like. Now, let's establish a light source. I like to use just a simple circle and a cone to indicate where the light source is positioned and where it is in relation to the scene. This just helps me visualize the size of the light and the direction the light's going to be coming from. For this exercise, let's just go for the top right side of the page, pretty much directly in line with the sphere, but slightly to the front. Since we have our circle, because it's not a sphere yet, and we have our light source, it's time to get rendering. Rendering is just a fancy word for shading or texturing. Personally, I like to lay down a flat 50% tone first. This is called a halftone. Just imagine where the light's going to hit the sphere and then draw a very, very light line to indicate where the shading will stop or start to taper off. Now I'll fill that area and imagine where the cast shadow is going to be too. And then I'm going to do the same thing. Now comes the fun part, dropping in the deeper shadows. On any rounded object, like a cylinder or a sphere, we're going to get what we call a core shadow. That's the deepest part of the shadow, where no reflected light or direct light hits the object. And it's usually close to that transition point, or where the halftone is that we identified earlier. The logic is whenever light gets reflected back onto an object, it lightens what most people would assume to be the darkest part of the shadow. That's just not the case. We need to consider that light reflects off of other surfaces and onto round surfaces. Next up, we can start to play with the cast shadow. Directly under a sphere or a cylinder is what's called the occlusion shadow. That's the darkest part of the shadow, period. It's even darker than the core shadow most of the time. That's where no bounced light or reflected light is going to end up. As the shadow moves away from the object, it tends to get lighter. And depending on how far or soft the lighting is, you can end up with a soft edge or a firm edge just at the end of the shadow. So brighter, close light sources will create firmer edges. The further or softer a light source is, the softer the edge of the shadow. Beyond the shadows, we can also use line weight to indicate darker parts of the sphere. So you can do a thicker, darker line on the shaded side of the sphere and a lighter, thinner line towards the top, lighter edge of the sphere. And last but not least, let's put in just a little bit of a highlight. After a few minutes of rendering, take your time here, you'll end up with what looks like a sphere. If you want to continue to challenge yourself, try spending 20 minutes or more on drawing an egg from life. It's a huge challenge. People don't even realize it. As far as your homework for this lesson, just try to keep up with the demonstration. Take your time on this and pay close attention to the different details of the shadows. You're learning how to control your pencil more and how to see different shapes and forms with shading and rendering. So good luck on the homework, keep at it, and I promise the more you practice, the more you're going to grow. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. And if you're new here, go ahead and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. And until next time, be creative.